Hi, and welcome to Sinatra CRUD App Episode 1. Before we get started, this episode is going to assume that you've completed all the steps in Episode 0, including the prerequisites. So if you haven't done that, please revisit that episode and then come back when you're finished. The purpose of this first episode is going to be to set up our first model using Active Record. That's the object relational mapper that Rails uses by default. But it's also a standalone gem, so you can incorporate it into Sinatra or any other Ruby app that you like. We're not going to do a deep dive into Active Record. That's not in the scope of this series, but we're going to do just enough to enable us to do a full-blown CRUD app. So we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing that we'll do is branch from master. It's a good habit to be in. And any application that you're working in with Git is to create a new branch for what you're doing. So we can git checkout branch, add contact model. And now we're in our own world. We're not touching master, and we can be more experimental. The next thing that we're going to do is some investigation. So we're going to see what rake tasks are available to us. And you'll notice that I'm preferencing everything with bundle exec here. And that's to make sure that the proper gems, the proper versions of each gem are being used when I run any of these tools, including rake. So we'll see here we have a lot of database commands and a few generators here. So the first thing that we want to do is bundle exec rake db create. The next thing that we're going to do is create a migration. And typically what you do in a migration is create a table or add a column or index to an existing table. And we have a generator for that, and there's a few reasons that we want to use it. It's going to mean that we write less code, and there's going to be some timestamp information on the file, which is important. Bundle exec generate migration. And you'll see that it gives us a helpful error message here that says that we need to specify the name of the migration. So we'll take the example that they gave us, paste it down here, and we just need to change the name from create task to create contacts. And now that we successfully create that migration, we can see that it creates this file for us and it gives us the full path. The important part here is the timestamp information. That's going to help Active Record run these in the correct order and also know if it's already run a migration or not. So we see the file that was generated for us here, and it has the structure but not the implementation of the change method. So we'll go ahead and Google how to create a table with an Active Record migration, and we'll look at the Rails guides to see what they have for us. So we'll see on the right-hand side that they have a creating a table link, and we'll follow that. And we see that they have a pretty good baseline example here for products. So I'll copy that code, move it over, and then we just need to change the name of the table to contacts and add the columns that we need. In addition, we want to make sure that our database enforces that the email cannot be blank or null. So if we go back over to the Rails guides, we see an example of how we can add that option here. So we can go ahead and copy that and add it over to our migration. The next step is for us to use rake to actually run the migrations. And when we run that, we'll see the output. Since this is the first time we've run any migrations, it creates a table called schema migrations. It also creates the table contacts with the columns that we specified, including the not null constraint for email. And then we'll also see at the end, it inserts a record into the schema migrations table. And that's the timestamp that we had prepended to that file. And that's how Active Record keeps track of the migrations that have been run already. The next thing that we're going to do is use rake to generate a model. This is going to be very similar to the way that we generated the migration. And you'll see that when we run it, it gives us a helpful example of how to use it. So we can copy and paste that. We just changed the name from user to contact. We run the generator and we'll see it's going to show us exactly where it's going to put the file here, just like it did for the migration. There's just no timestamp information for this one. Now we can take a look at the file that it generated for us. And just a quick note, if you're using Active Record prior to version 4, you would have to add this adder accessible for all the columns that you want accessible. And we're using Active Record 4.2, and for 4.0 and later, this isn't necessary. As we'll see in the console, Active Record is able to use the table names and column names to infer what the attributes need to be. So it isn't necessary for us to add any code to have these attributes available. But what we can add to our model is first a validation on email, and that's going to match our database validation. It's just going to be at the application layer, so it'll give us more helpful error messages that are easier to deal with and report to end users. And the other thing that we'll add is a virtual attribute called full name that's just going to be a combination of the first name and the last name. So now that we have those created, we can play around with instantiating a new contact that's valid and saving it. So we go back to the console and we can test out the full name virtual attribute. And then we can also test creating a new contact with an email. And we'll check if it's persisted. That's going to tell us whether or not it's in the database already. And then the next thing that we check is whether or not it's valid. And it's going to pass our email validation. That's the only one that we have. So we can go ahead and save it, and we'll see it then makes an insert statement and it puts it into the database. Now we can see that the persisted has switched to true, and now that new contact is in our list of all contacts. Now we'll create an invalid contact, one that doesn't have an email. And we'll see here when we call valid on that, it says false. And now we have these error messages, and Active Record has a convenience method called full messages that makes it human readable. And this is where having the validation at the application layer in the model is helpful in addition to having it on the database itself. Now we can use Git to review the files that we've added, and then actually review the content of those files with diff. And these all look good, so we'll go ahead and commit these. There we go. And now we're ready to move on to our next phase, which is going to be adding the controller, and we'll be leveraging the model when we run that code. So we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.